Hello and welcome to Mad About Sports. And today we have with us a very interesting guest. It is none other than Kaustubh Pandey. He's been an editor and consultant with some of the biggest brands out there, which includes Al Jazeera, Media House, Pixstory, BBC, and Italian football news. Today he's going to be with us to share his story regarding journalism, sports journalism, and of course he's going to inspire a lot of you youngsters to take up that profession as well. Welcome, Kaustubh. It's a pleasure to have you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I usually love speaking about what the field's all about. So yeah, here I am. I'll be really happy to talk about anything you want.
That's wonderful. Actually, let's get going. Usually, we do start off by asking, "How did your journey in sports get going?" Because there's always this particular moment or this journey which would have inspired you towards sports, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my journey with sports never started off with football. Honestly, it started with cricket, and
Yeah,
then over time it moved over to wrestling or WWE.
yeah.
You know, there was a time. I still am. I'm a massive Jeff Hardy fan. I hope we know who Jeff Hardy is. He was
Yeah,
this.
of course.
Uh,
Yeah,
he was this
WWE.
person who almost inspired a lot of us to be different. I
Yes,
mean, a lot of people from that generation to be very different from, different from the herd essentially.
right,
Um, Through everything he did. I mean, be it his in-ring style, his in-ring attire, or the way he, approached stuff. I mean, he had his issues, of course. I mean, a lot of us do, but
yeah,
he was this person who was never afraid to be himself, essentially.
right,
I mean, I used to watch him a lot, and over time, I grew into someone who just wanted to do something different in a way.
right,
Um, so over time, through my obsession with sport, I mean, I used to play a fair bit. I mean, never at a national level or a district level or
mm,
anything. I used to play a lot. I mean, I love playing cricket and a bit of football as well. I think football
right,
came way later. I think
right,
around 2010 or something. But as soon as I started watching football, I realized how massive football is in terms of the
right,
influence it has on people.
right,
Um, and just for the fact that it's a 90-minute game, and I think no
right.
other sport in the world captivates the world for that 90 minutes that football does.
Absolutely.
I mean, cricket can probably do that for a couple of countries, or maybe five, six
Right,
countries. I mean, no
right,
disrespect to cricket or anything, but
right.
football's got this massive power which links it to, economies, politics,
Mm,
a lot of these ideas which are not restricted to the very confines of sport or the very confines of
right,
football itself. So I think that's where it began. I thought football. I mean, I'm a massive reader as well. So back then, I used to read a lot of stuff. I mean, I
right,
realized that football's, more of a means of expression than cricket or any other sport because
right,
cricket is not cricket's played with a bat or a ball, and a
right,
lot of other sports out there are also played with an external tool, which can be a lot of different things. But football is probably one of the very few sport which uh, is not played with an external tool attached to the body or something like that. I'm going
yeah,
into a very different phase of
yes,
thinking now.
yes, yes,
But you know, football. That's why I used to think of football as a means of expression and as something which is bigger than the sport itself. I mean,
right,
that's where obsession with football began. But as I said, I mean, it began with completely different sport in general. I mean, WWE is
absolutely.
not a sport; it's sports entertainment. But I mean, that's a 12-year-old kid. That's what he used to think. I mean, WWE is a sport. I mean, I used to be so emotional about every loss or win. But yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I realize how different it is now. But it didn't actually begin with football. It began with cricket. I mean, that's it's a cliche for a lot of people here in India, but it is what it is.
But there's no better way to put up football out there. That's the most beautiful way I've seen someone describe football. And yeah, man, that's big ups. Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I'll just come to you on that, right? Because especially when it comes to your writing, the way in which you're expressing stuff, have you ever felt like I always wanted to be a writer? Like, did you have that passion, or like as growing up in your educational background as well?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I was about in class 3, I used to write random stuff about. I mean, I used to watch Dragon Ball Z a lot. Stuff
Right,
like
right.
Pokemon and
Absolutely, yeah.
whatever teenagers of the not teenagers. I mean, the pre-teens of that era used to watch stuff like Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and stuff like that. I used to make my own storylines of those cartoons.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was there from a very young age. And over time, I used to write a lot of non-fiction stories, sorry, fiction stories and poems. So it was always there. And when football came in, I thought, uh, why not dabble with stuff? Why not write about football? I mean, this was in class 11th, I think. That's when I first
Right,
started writing up. So I already had a background and interest. And I think not having to be, I mean, in the science or commerce field in class 11th and 12th. I mean, that's the dilemma we all have. Sort of
yeah.
helped because I think it helped me streamline stuff along what I was studying as well. Because I used to study a lot of history, political science, and
Mm,
I used to be a geography buff, and like I still am.
right,
And all of that aligned with football as well, because football has all these. I mean, pretty much every sport has those elements, but I think helped a lot when I started writing football in class 11th. So that's when in Indian schools, the streams, start getting allocated. So that helped
right.
as well. But I think I was writing for about 6, 7 years before that. I mean, writing in the sense that just for the sake of expressing stuff, just for the sake
Right,
of writing stuff. So I think that's
right.
that's pretty much it for that.
Absolutely. That's beautiful actually. That's why I want to ask you. You didn't mention about how you got into football. Has there been any footballing moment that says where you feel like, wow, this is why I really want to watch football? Like anything which has inspired you, maybe growing up as a child, because I think there might have been a lot of them, but if you have to pinpoint and pick one of them which really caught your eye and was like, okay, yeah, this is a reason why I want to watch the sport and this is just amazing to connect with.
I mean, not as a kid, but I mean, this event took place about a couple of months or about 4 months ago, and that was probably Leo Messi winning the World Cup. And the reason for that is because a lot of us, form these storylines with football.
Right.
Uh, like we talk about life comes around along in full circles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And for a script, I mean, I'm saying it's a script because it seemed like one, and you don't
Yeah.
often see something like that, taking place in football. So, I mean, I don't think I've seen a plot like that unfold in football over last. I mean, ever
Hmm.
since I've started watching football itself,
Hmm.
because it was a story which started with the Argentine footballing history.
Right.
Uh, then there was the Maradona World Cups.
Right.
Uh, I mean, and in the 1920s, there was a prophecy which said that a kid from the streets will make Argentina proud, alleviate them from struggles and slavery and inflation and whatnot. And then we have Messi struggling to win the World Cup. And I think it was also the fact that we as a generation have been stuck in this debate about two players.
Right.
And if say Messi hadn't won the World Cup, this generation would have been stuck in that debate forever. This generation of football fans would have been stuck in that never-ending debate about who was better, who wasn't better. I mean, I don't think who's better, who's not, who's
Yeah.
not the better of the two is even a
Mm,
debate because it's a completely different context. But I think it was also quite a fitting thing for our generation where we saw Messi winning the World Cup because it ends a debate. You know, it ends something of a dilemma for all of us. And I think
mm.
in a lot of different ways, it was a brilliant moment for football. I mean, pretty much a lot of football fans. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely. I agree
be
with you.
it in terms of storytelling, in terms of what it means for our generation, and what it means for the sport itself. I mean, it
Yeah.
was quite a fitting moment in a lot of
Absolutely.
different ways.
Right. I mean, you just mentioned it in the most perfect way. It's just poetic because as an Argentine fan myself as well, I just could feel whatever you just mentioned over the last 2 to 3 minutes, and it was just beautiful in itself. That's why I'll just come to this point as well because as a football right, as a football pundit as well. Have you ever connected to any other team other than Argentina as well? Because okay, I just want to cover this team particularly. This team really fascinates me. Maybe it could be an underdog story. Maybe it could be a
Yeah.
story which might have really, really kept you engrossed onto it.
So I think um, I've supported Fiorentina for a while now. I mean, that's for a completely different reason. I mean, they are an underdog themselves, but I've really sort of connected with Bournemouth as well over the last,
Yeah.
let's say, 7, 8 years. I mean, ever since they came to the Premier League, and once I
Yeah.
got to know about their story as a club, because this is back
Yeah.
in 2016. I wrote a story about them, talking to people around the club, people around uh, the area itself, the area of Bournemouth in England. So I
Yeah.
spoke to people, and I got to know that there was a time at Bournemouth where they didn't even have the finances to buy meals for the club, for the players at the club.
Right.
So I learned that they had to rely on a pizzeria located close to their stadium, which is now the glittering Vitality Stadium. Wasn't Vitality about 10 years ago? It used to be Dean
Right.
Court, which in itself says a lot about the club. Dean Court's a very, comes across as a very ramshackle name in itself. So
Yeah.
back then they used to rely on free pizzas from a nearby pizzeria, and that's when Eddie Howe took over the club, and they were in administration back in the last professional division of English football.
Right. 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 Right.
And across 5 divisions, Eddie Howe did the impossible. Um, they went into the Premier League, even finished as high as ninth in the Premier League, which is,
Yeah.
I think, one of the best footballing stories over the previous couple of decades in terms of their rise and what they went through. And over the last 5 years, I don't think Eddie Howe lost uh, a lot of players that he actually had in the fourth division of English football. I think,
Yeah.
he had some players like Harry Arter who were with him in League One,
Yeah.
and they played for Bournemouth in the Premier League as well. And I think there
Yeah.
were players like Charlie Daniels. We had Adam Smith playing with Bournemouth in League One, and Adam Smith is still pretty much there playing Premier League football after all those times. Ryan Fraser used to be a youngster. He's still with Eddie Howe at Bournemouth. Oh, sorry, at Newcastle United. And I
Yeah.
think Eddie Howe's story has also been quite fascinating to me because uh, of when he took over the club, where the club was, and how he shaped the club tactically, and how the club have turned out to be in terms of how how Eddie Howe himself gave the club an identity in terms of how to play
Yeah.
football and how to
Yeah.
um, their identity off the pitch as well. There's one. It's having an on-pitch tactical identity is completely different in
Right.
terms of how a coach implements his ideas onto the in the training ground. But
Yeah.
having this uh, incredible man management to make sure that when the club was in administration, he made sure that the players stayed, and they were what -21
Yeah.
uh, in League Two, and they ended up surviving that season. And from there on, we know what's happened, and that takes immense man management skills.
Mm.
Apart from being tactically astute. And I think Eddie Howe and Bournemouth are one of my favorite stories in football in general. And I think we have a lot of stories like that in football in
Yeah.
general, especially
Absolutely.
in Serie A, which is a league I cover a fair bit. But I don't think I've seen anything quite like Bournemouth unfold in football.
Absolutely. I mean, that's beautifully put up there. I mean, the stories, a lot of people who are watching this now really, suggest you people to go and have a read on Bournemouth and how Eddie Howe really transformed the club. That's why I want to ask you your first major break. I mean, you just, as we're getting on with the stories, what is your first major break professionally? Has it been something like where you really wanted to get into that journalism and writing and that you got the first break unexpectedly, or was it something which you always wanted, which you got?
I think depends on what we mean by the word break. Because one of the
Yeah.
few, I mean, when I first started writing off, as I said, I started writing when I was in 11th class.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the first few articles I wrote got about for some, I mean, not like I care about the views or anything. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think when people write and when they start off they should care about the views in general.
Right.
But when you actually get those views, you feel fairly motivated. I mean, you feel as if what you're doing is being read out there. I mean, when what you are doing is holds some sort of consideration in the market out there. So it was
Yeah.
one. I can't even remember what story it was. I mean, it was probably
Yeah.
a transfer story about Javi Garcia. I mean, that former Manchester City midfielder who played for Zenit St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
I think it was a transfer story about him. And for some reason, it crossed about 1 lakh views. I mean, I don't know how, or I don't know why, but it just
Yeah.
did. And mm, was probably not my best story out there. I mean, I look back on a lot of stuff I did about, you know, during those times or even 5 6 years ago, and I
Yeah.
cringe a fair bit. And
Yeah.
if I look back on that story, I'll cringe a lot as well. But
Okay.
to hand that, I mean, the reason why that story was quite important is the fact that I was writing random articles about, transfer
Right.
stories about what's going on, maybe some stuff about my opinion as well about, say,
Right.
can Tottenham be better without Gareth Bale, because that's when Gareth Bale left. So
Okay.
I was writing these opinion articles that were not fetching too many views, and maybe
Yeah.
in hindsight, I could have lost motivation a couple of months down the line. But when I came across that story and the amount of views I got, I thought maybe there's something going on. And over time, I think there've been, especially when I was younger, there were like 2 or 3 stories of that type where I thought uh, maybe there's something going on. And one of those was probably the Bournemouth story I talked
I
about.
can I just ask you a follow up question? So where do you used to write all this? Did you publish it somewhere, or how did you go about it?
The transfer story I spoke about, that was for Sportskeeda.
Okay.
Uh, this was probably in my first year itself. I mean, first year of my writing.
Right.
Uh, but over time, I began writing for 90 minutes. I mean, 90 minutes was called FTBL, something like that. It had a different
Okay.
name back then. 90 minutes, that name changed about
Yeah.
3 4 years after I started writing.
Yeah.
So I started writing for FTBL. Then I wrote for Give Me Sport as well. Give Me
Mhm.
Sport had this academy system back then where
Okay.
you write for them, and
Mhm.
you climb up their academy ladder where
Okay.
you are currently in, say, standard D.
Okay.
So once you've written about 30 articles a month, you've published 30 articles a month, you climb into grade C. So that's how
Okay.
things were. And that sort of helped me a lot back then,
Mm.
because I got this motivation not just to write, but to, have this motivation of climbing up that ladder. I mean,
Right.
that was a pretty good way that Give Me Sport sort of helped me a lot. Because I don't think
Mhm.
Sportskeeda had that. And even though oh, sorry, I think the site was called FTB Pro, by the way, not FTBL.
Okay.
So I think FTB Pro also had this weekly leaderboard of some sort,
Right.
uh, which sort of did help. But I think the Give Me Sport, uh, whatever that was, that academy system sort of helped me a lot in
Yeah.
terms of pushing myself to write more. And as I said, when I look back on those articles, I don't feel that they're probably the worst I've ever written, but
Okay.
that's when I was about, what, 16 or something. So I do hold some consideration for that factor as well. But yeah, I think that's that Bournemouth story I did. That was also a key, you know, uh, article for me, because when I got that published, in a couple of days, the pizzeria I wrote about, the owner of that pizzeria actually commented on that story as well, saying that,
Wow.
yeah, this actually happened. He actually said that uh, Bournemouth actually didn't ask for the free pizzas. The
Right.
pizzeria owner actually gave it to them themselves. So I mean, factually, I was wrong, but at least I got this motivation that I'm doing something right after all. I mean, this was back in my second year of undergraduate at Christ
Right.
University. So
Right.
I mean, Christ University, I've got a very rigorous sort of education schedule,
Yeah.
and I used to sacrifice a lot of it just to write about football and watch a lot of football and read a lot of football. So
Yeah.
since I was making those sacrifices, getting that comment from that pizzeria owner, that
Yeah.
sort of sparked, some sort of a motivation in me. I mean, to write more, not just across a month, but write more every day and read up about football, a lot of different aspects of football every day. Because this was not a normal, this was not some sort of a article which you find on, Give Me Sport or Sportskeeda. The
Right.
articles that they do are very different. They are news articles or listicles. But this was something uh, that I saw as a means to step into, what I would call as reporting. I mean, reporting is a very generic term, but writing slash journalism, where I was actually covering the real stories that you know that for me actually matter more than your where one club is about to sign a player, which player is going where. So I think these stories actually matter more for me. So I think that's when I sort of thought, maybe not why not delve into this side of the sport as well. And I think that's what I'm doing now. So if not for that, I could have maybe stuck with uh, doing a different sort of football writing or doing something else in football. But I think there have been like two or three more stages on the way, different
Right.
articles on the way. But I think those two have been quite important early on because that's when I needed, the push or motivation, external motivation. I mean, there's two types of motivation. I think one's internal,
Mm,
one's external. Uh,
right.
I needed that external motivation to, push further. So I think that Bournemouth story was quite often. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I like Bournemouth as well.
I mean, that's perfect because a lot of these people, a lot of these youngsters will also be watching it. So, what would you suggest them at this point? Because would you just say just keep writing, because or just keep writing to what you really like, or write about these kind of stories because it can absolutely catch a lot of eyeballs. Because sometimes, as youngsters or as aspiring journalists, you have your biases. You want to write about the top clubs in Europe. You want to talk about a Barcelona. They're undergoing
Yeah,
a financial situation. You want to talk about Real Madrid, who's chasing the 15th
yeah,
UCL title. Or sometimes is it so important to connect with these small stories because at times a lot of people do not know about these stories. For example, Union Berlin is a wonderful story in itself. They can maybe talk about it, let the world know about it, and maybe even the club might even respond to it, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, I think even at this stage, I still come across this dilemma a fair bit because, uh, in fields such as these, you sometimes feel as if you are constantly on this robotic grind to meet the industry demands, where you're constantly writing, you're pretty much writing 10 articles, 10 news articles every day. But then there's this side of you which wants to use writing as a, form of expression, which I think is where I started off with when it comes to writing about stuff in general. But I think when it comes, I think my context was quite different because I started writing quite early. So I would definitely recommend a lot of people to start writing early because it doesn't just help you gain experience early on, but secondly, it also helps you carve out a niche for yourself early on. I'm not saying just
Right,
write football every day. I mean,
right,
find new ways to, express yourself, be it art, music, or uh, painting, or whatnot. I love all of those. But I think uh, if you start with these things early on, uh, you figure out a niche for yourself, where which I think is something a lot of people still struggle to get to grips with. Because I see a lot of people out there, um, you know, writing stuff, but still not being happy with what they're doing. I'm not just talking about football in general, but or sports in general, but even generally, where they're writing 10 articles a day, but they still are not happy with it, with what they're doing,
right.
and they want to find a new means of expression. And I think if people start off early with not just
Right.
writing, but also when it comes to art or music or all
Mm,
these creative outlets that they want to make a career in or they're passionate about,
right,
it helps you learn a lot about what you really want to do and what sort of niche you want to cater to. Uh,
right,
and I think we are currently in a stage in the football writing market or football
right.
market in general where we've reached a saturation point. I mean,
Mm,
this is just my opinion, where I've speak to a lot of people almost pretty much every day,
right.
where I see that we've sort of reached a saturation point, or we're heading closer to that saturation
Mm,
point, where a lot of people are doing quite the same thing. And
right,
the people who stand out are the ones who created a niche for themselves. You see that on
right,
Twitter usually, or
right,
I think on Instagram as well. I mean, I'm not
right.
massive on Instagram, but I think
Twitter, yeah,
uh,
definitely.
the people who created a niche for themselves are the one who actually stand out,
Right,
whereas a lot of people are just doing the same thing. So I think this is what I'm pointing towards, where finding a niche is all that
right.
matters at this point. Where
Mhm.
I mean, it all depends on whether someone wants to stand out or not. And if you're standing out of say about 10 people,
Yeah,
or I mean, even if you're standing out of 5 people, you're expanding your horizons in a way, expanding the amount of opportunities you can get. And
right,
I think a lot of times when people are about at the age of 20 or 21, they don't get enough time to combine studies with writing 10 articles a
right,
day for a website and then
right,
using writing as a form of self expression. I think
right,
that's why I'm saying that starting early with creative stuff uh,
right,
always helps. Always helps,
right.
not just in terms of helping you express yourself, but also in terms of
Mhm.
uh, finding your pathway.
Absolutely.
in your passion itself. Because I
Absolutely.
started writing. I mean, as I said, my case is completely different. But
Yeah.
since I started quite early, um, I sort of you know did a lot of different things in football writing itself. Be it
Absolutely.
writing news articles, be it scout reports, be it doing stat stuff, data stuff. But
Right.
exploring has helped me find a niche for myself as well. And I think I would definitely recommend a lot of people to do that as well. Keep exploring these different avenues, and at the end of it, you'll finally come across a niche for yourself, which you can connect with. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's not as if, I mean, a lot of people out there connect with the data stuff, which
Right.
which is great for them because that's a niche. And if you
Mm.
are catering to a niche, you are much more likely to find new opportunities, and people will actually approach you for stuff. And I think that's
Mm.
happened with me quite a lot. And I'm quite glad that I started early. And
Yeah.
sometimes I feel it's sort of a privileged position to be in because I started early. And a lot of people don't get the chance to do that as well. But I would definitely say that no matter what, try to start as early as possible. I'm not saying start when you're 3 or 4, but
Yeah.
start when you are say what in ninth grade or 10th grade, something like that.
I mean, that's why I'm just going to put this question as well, because now we're going into a particular era where people are reluctant readers. I mean, it's a fact, right? A lot of people do not have enough
Yeah,
time to read. People want to watch something, and that too, even for watching something, they want it in 60 seconds. We are in that fast-paced mode. Even somewhere or the other, that has really taken an effect on the entire reading structure
yeah.
or the entire journalistic perspective as well, because now everybody has become so video inclined. So as writers, how do you take about it? How do you really engross someone who really is new to reading, someone who wants to get to reading?
I think a bit of it comes down to the niche angle as well,
Yeah.
because there's one part about finding your niche, and
Right.
there's the other part about catering to the niche which already exists out there. I mean, when it comes to the first part, I'm talking about doing something specific, which
Right.
which is I think what you pointed towards.
Right.
While whereas the second one is where you're doing these news articles pretty much every day, you're getting these views and you're getting paid for it, which I think is fine as well. Which I mean, there's a market for it out, a massive market for it out there because as football fans, we all love transfer rumors, the news articles. It's natural that they will get a massive amount of views. They are the
Yeah.
real money makers out there. But I think the first one is the more contentious one because it takes a while for you to find that niche, and secondly, there's never a guarantee that you'll find a niche. And even if you find a niche, what's the actual market for it? Because I've got a lot of friends who are in the creative field as well,
Yeah.
uh, who you know sometimes to write something, put their stuff out there, but the
Mm.
niche is so small that you know the number of views they get is pretty much 1/10 of what you can get of uh, you know your news articles or your regular news articles, which are say 200 words or something. So I
Yeah.
think uh, it comes down to finding that niche as well, where there's times when you start off where you don't get any views at all because you're just starting off.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean you can't expect a third division team to win the Champions League or something like that. I
Yeah.
mean that's a reference which I usually use.
Yeah.
So people need to be constant with it. Need to be consistent with what they're writing, and when it comes to writing about their niche, say if
Right.
someone's writing about um, the socio-political angles of football,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, write about it. Say write 15 articles a month, or say 10
Right.
articles a month. Be consistent with that, and
Right.
keep posting that on social media as well. Because a lot of times I see, I mean, it's a very psychological thing as well, which I won't delve into now, but because it's a completely
Yeah.
different angle in itself. But a lot of people post stuff out there on their social media. It doesn't get enough likes or attention, or doesn't get enough
Right.
views on social media. And then there's this feeling of unhappiness which comes with not getting enough views of it. But I
Hmm.
think people are always watching. I mean, I'm always watching. If there's a
Yeah.
young writer out there who's putting in the right amount of effort out there, who's putting out 15 articles a month about a specific niche, I'm always watching. I mean, a lot of people out there in the market are always watching the younger writers. So it's always important to put stuff out there instead of feeling scared. I mean, I get why people feel scared. I mean, I used to as well. But uh, putting yourself out there is the biggest thing you can do when it comes to breaking into the industry. And when it comes to, I mean, I probably like segued away from what you
Yeah.
asked from your initial question, but uh, there's ways to make sure that the readers feel hooked into the story. I mean,
Right.
especially when it comes to long form writing, because I had this issue about 5, 6 years ago where writing came across as clunky to the readers.
Right.
Where I
Right.
started off with, say, uh, Eric Ten Hag, Man United. Uh,
Right.
a couple of early paragraphs are a completely different narrative, uh,
Yeah.
which has a movie reference. And in the
Okay.
fourth paragraph, I'm connecting that to Man United's current situation.
Right.
So if a reader is reading 3 paragraphs, uh, it's very likely that he'll end up feeling disconnected from what's actually going on in the story. So it's
Right.
important to get into the gist of the story early on, at least via the second paragraph, because if I'm a reader, I mean, we live in a very fast-paced environment now,
Yeah.
where we
Agree.
can get information in a couple of seconds out there on Twitter.
Yeah.
So unless you are someone like Jonathan Liu or Henry Winter or someone like that,
Yeah.
you need to make sure that you get into the gist of the story in the second paragraph. I mean,
Yeah.
the reference I use film references, in my articles a fair bit, but
Right.
these historical references of maybe comparing someone like Cristiano Ronaldo to someone like Napoleon, you know,
Right.
references like that. So just to make sure that the readers feel hooked into the story and connected to the story and don't, you know, hit that
Mm-hmm.
cross button up at the top of their screens,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, we need to get into the gist of the story quite quickly. And also to make sure that the language of the articles are, easy to read. I'm not saying don't use your uh, flashy words. There's a
Right.
time and place for it, but make sure that you're catering to your reader when you're writing stuff, and you don't use jargons as such. I mean, again,
Right.
depends on the niche you're catering to. If you found your niche, it's fine.
Right.
But if say it's a socio-political article connecting it to football and the
Right.
Qatar World Cup and stuff, so
Mm.
it's likely that you won't come across too many jargons. Even if you come across those jargons, you can easily
Right.
explain the meaning of those jargons in the article. So make sure that
Interesting.
your reader is constantly, connected to what you're writing and what's written in the article. So I think there's at least two of those things that writers definitely need to take care about when they're writing long form stuff,
Right.
because stuff like that can easily get lost, in this massive crowd of information that we have, this information overload that we have. So it's important to
Mm.
make sure that we get the gist of the article quickly
Yeah.
and make sure that our language that we're using in the piece is easily understandable. It's not Machiavellian or
Yeah.
almost Plato-esque where you've got to
Yeah.
Google every term. I mean, it's fine to an extent, but you can explain those terms in the article itself.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's going to inspire a lot of these youngsters. I mean, the way you put it up, it's like a guide for a lot of the youngsters to take up and the way to go ahead as well. But before we end, I just want to ask you, what is your niche like? Are you more story based or are you someone who's inclined to stats and analytics as well? Because that's a growing trend. A lot of people want to know the numbers. It's all about let me understand what the numbers of these players are. Let me compare them with the previous generation. Let me compare them with this possible compatriot on the modern day era. So that's what I want to know. Are you someone who's inclined to it when you especially build up a story? Like I want to bring the numbers so you can also hook the reader on.
Yeah, I mean, I've dabbled with numbers a fair bit. This was during the lockdown era. Uh,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people actually dabble with it as well. But over time,
yeah,
I've switched to. I mean, I have these phases where I shift my niches, or if anything, I constantly do different things at once. So
right,
currently, I'm more into the big picture stuff in football when it comes to the political angles, the economic effects, could be the historical tactical effects as well, which again ties into the fact that I can use stats to back up a lot of stuff. Say if
right.
it's an article about maybe Dusan Vlahovic struggling at Juventus, I
Hmm.
mean that's not a socio-political angle in football by any means, but there's a definite possibility of adding a statistical picture into it. Having
Right,
numbers
right,
about how he fared at Fiorentina, system that he had in place there,
right,
and why he thrived there. So adding that context using stats is always. I mean, stats can be can go either way,
Yeah.
depending on what your point of view is. So it's
Yeah.
but that's pretty much why they're a massive thing to have. They're a very useful thing to have from the perspective of a writer, especially. But I think as of now, I do a lot of news stuff because my role
Yeah.
at Get Italian Football News gets me to write news articles, but
Yeah.
I usually edit a lot of stuff there. So
Yeah.
that's a completely different thing. But currently, I'm a massive buff about socio-political, the economic effects of football. The
Right.
historical,
Right.
the
Right.
bigger historical angle. I think it'll probably stay that way as well, because I
Mm.
think I've pretty much tried everything over the last
Right.
ever since I started writing. So I think it will probably stay this way for a while, or
Yeah.
but I think you never know. But
Yeah.
I think that this is how it will probably stay, because as I
Mm.
said, my background's always been uh, political sciences, history. I mean, as I said, I had arts in class 11 and 12, so I think it's only natural for me to dabble more often with stuff like that. But I think
Yeah.
that's probably what I'll stick with. But we'll see. We'll see.
Very interesting. Finally, I just want to know about your gig with Manchester United as well, because you did have a gig with them. How was that like? Was it something where they give you the freedom to write about the club, or was it something which you focused on all news across there?
No, I think it was more about they handed those ideas to me. This was when I was in the University of Salford in Manchester. So I had this brief time working with them, where they handed me these ideas where I could, write articles around those, quotes or those angles, and come up with narratives around that. But it was very focused. It was not. Uh, it, I mean, for a lack of a better word, there was no creative freedom out there, because United are a very closely knit group, and they already have an audience there, and they
Yeah.
already have a structure in place where you need to cater to those demands. So
Right.
yeah, as I said, it was about writing those specific articles pretty much every day. I also went to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's first press conference as a United
Yeah.
manager, as a permanent United manager, in fact,
Wow.
which is still one of my best moments in the field. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, it was pretty much about meeting their demands instead of me putting forward those ideas.
Yeah.
But there's a different role I'm currently in with Juventus, where I'm more into handing them ideas, and
Okay.
it depends on them whether they want to accept them or not.
Yeah.
Uh, so there's more of a creative freedom there, but the United one was completely different, since I was working with
Absolutely.
the media team for that brief period, and
Right.
since the university I was in and United have that close working relationship, so I had to obey those demands as well. So I couldn't go away from those demands. So that's pretty much how it was. But yeah, it was quite a fun time to work with United.
Wonderful, actually. That's gonna really inspire a lot of these fans and a lot of these aspiring journalists as well. Because okay, you can work with maybe your favorite team as well. So that's an interesting part about it. But it's been wonderful interacting with you, Costa, because a lot of stories, a lot of inspirational stuff out there. A lot of people hearing would have actually taken a note of it as well. Wonderful interacting with you, and pleasure having you on the show, because these are the stories people would like to hear. These are journeys which people will definitely take a note of as well. Thank you, Costa. Have a good time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed coming on.
And guys, if you haven't already checked out our channel, do check out our channel on YouTube, and also follow our Instagram page. That's where we'll be keeping you updated with latest sports content across the world. And we are going to keep bringing more of these exciting chapters and podcasts in the coming future as well.